Tonight, we delve into the darkest corner of forgotten science, a historical blight on medical ethics, and the chilling story behind the title, The Last Thing You Will See Before the Lights Go Out Forever. This isn't a ghost story, nor is it mere folklore. This is the grim history of the ocular device, a machine designed in the shadows of the 1950s, an era obsessed with breaking the final barrier of existence. We begin with Dr. Alistair Finch, a name expunged from every medical journal and academic archive, an existentialist scientist whose obsession was not to prevent death, but to document its final, conscious moment. Finch believed that the human eye, in its last electrical surge before brain activity ceased, acted as a temporary storage vault, briefly holding the final, raw, unfiltered image the soul saw as it slipped away. He was convinced that if we could capture that image, the one solitary thing perceived in the absolute final fraction of a second, we could understand the true nature of the transition, the reality that lay beyond the curtain. Finch was an outsider ostracized by the mainstream, operating out of a damp, forgotten basement beneath the crumbling St. Judas Infirmary in rural Maine, a place reserved for the desperately ill, those whose lives were already deemed statistically concluded, making them perfect, unwitting subjects for his grim curiosity. The ocular device itself was a grotesque assemblage of copper coils, vacuum tubes, and a specially adapted, high-speed cathode ray tube connected directly, invasively, and horrifically to the optic nerve. It wasn't designed to save, only to record. The true horror wasn't the device's invention, but Finch's unwavering dedication to its purpose. He wasn't looking for God or a pleasant afterlife. Finch was hunting for the void, determined to capture its terrifying, final visual signature. And as we will discover, he found something far, far worse than nothingness. His first subjects were silent, their passing unmarked save for a single flickering photograph spat out by the machine. The images were always distorted, grainy, and utterly incomprehensible to human eyes, yet Finch meticulously filed them, claiming each one was a crucial piece of the celestial puzzle, growing increasingly manic and obsessed with the vague shapes and dark geometries they contained. The atmosphere in that basement became toxic, heavy with the stench of antiseptic and the cold metallic reality of finality, and soon the facility's own staff began to speak of a creeping dread, a sense of being watched not by the living, but by the recently departed, whose final sights had been stolen by the mad doctor. Finch, driven by the chilling whispers of his own intellect, was ready to move beyond the terminally ill. He was ready to test the device on someone whose consciousness was still vibrant, someone who could articulate what they were seeing even as the light vanished. The lines of ethics were not just crossed. They were vaporized by the searing heat of his morbid scientific hunger. Finch's initial experimentation period, chronicled in fragmented police reports and redacted hospital files, began subtly and escalated into outright violation, marking the true descent into the abyss of his work. His first subjects, all non-communicative due to their illnesses, offered only visual noise, flashes of distorted light, smears of color, or overwhelming fields of blackness. But one night, an elderly patient, identified only as Patient X, provided the first truly unnerving result. This man had been blind for 20 years, yet when Finch activated the ocular device, the output screen flickered to life, showing not random static, but an image of profound, structured terror. The captured last sight was a geometric pattern of cold, interlocking shapes, floating in an infinite, ink-black void, a sight the man himself could never have naturally perceived. This anomaly solidified Finch's horrifying hypothesis. The device was not capturing a memory. It was intercepting a signal. It was capturing the first visual information from the other side, the welcoming committee, or perhaps the mechanism of final consciousness itself. The official medical records of St. Jude's simply recorded the deaths as natural causes, but the assisting staff knew better. They whispered about the electrical humming, the faint smell of ozone, and the strange, quiet dread that clung to the air every time Finch finished a procedure. The ethical horror deepened when Finch began testing on patients who were not terminal, but merely suffering from conditions that severely impaired their quality of life, using bureaucratic loopholes and coerced consent to justify his means. He needed a subject whose mind was still sharp, whose sensory input was clear, so that the signal, whatever it was, would be strong and distinct. He found his candidate in a young research assistant named Thomas Davies, a man suffering from severe debilitating nerve pain who volunteered for the ultimate sacrifice. Convinced by Finch's silver tongue that he would contribute to the final understanding of the human condition, the moment Davies was connected to the machine, a procedure carried out in absolute secrecy, was the pivotal point where Finch crossed from mad scientist into something monstrous. As Davies lay strapped down, tubes leading from his optic nerve to the glowing core of the ocular device, he began to weep, not from the pain of the procedure, but from a profound, existential terror that transcended physical suffering. He claimed he could feel the device preparing to steal his final perception, describing it as a cold intrusion, a cosmic eye preparing to gaze back. Finch, indifferent to the suffering, activated the machine. The result was instantaneous and catastrophic. Davies convulsed violently, not dying from his underlying condition, but from an immediate, total systemic shutdown, as if his mind simply refused the intrusion. The ocular device, however, recorded its clearest image, yet a single overwhelming shape that Finch described in his private journal with barely contained madness. It was a perfect sphere, impossibly dark, not reflecting light but consuming it, framed by millions of tiny screaming faces. This image, the documented last sight of a fully conscious man, was immediately locked away, deemed too dangerous for the world, marking the beginning of the institutional cover-up that would define the rest of Finch's terrifying legacy. Following the horrific incident involving Thomas Davies, Dr. Alastair Finch did not face legal repercussions. Instead, he simply vanished. The local authorities, under pressure from a mysterious, unnamed entity later revealed to be the Directorate, a clandestine government body tasked with suppressing fringe science, ruled Davies' death as an unforeseen medical complication and Finch's disappearance as a flight from professional guilt. The truth was far more chilling. Finch did not flee. He was either taken or he knowingly stepped into the void he had been documenting. His entire laboratory was meticulously dismantled and incinerated save for one crucial element, his private journal, a densely written leather-bound manuscript detailing every experiment, every failure, and every terrifying finding which he had deliberately hidden within the hollowed-out concrete foundation of the infirmary's old boiler room. This manuscript remained undiscovered for 27 years, found accidentally by construction workers during the Infirmary E's demolition in 1982. The journal's pages did not contain typical scientific data. They contained a descent into metaphysical horror. The writing was often illegible, interspersed with disturbing, complex geometric diagrams and frantic sketches of the dark sphere captured from Davies' final moments. The most alarming entry, dated just 2 days before his disappearance, detailed his new, petrifying conclusion about the nature of the last sight. Finch wrote that the ocular device was not merely a recorder. It was a transmitter. Every time he activated it, he wasn't capturing the final image of the dying mind. He was calling something to the threshold of consciousness right at the moment of death, using the departing soul as a beacon. The last sight was not a memory of the past, but a visual entity arriving to greet or perhaps claim the departing awareness. He described the spherical shape he captured as the observer, a silent, insatiable entity that existed just outside the boundary of life and death, an entity that fed on the final, purest burst of consciousness. His last complete entry was a desperate plea, scribbled across 2 pages, surrounded by furious black cross hatching. It knows I saw it. It saw me seeing it. The light does not go out forever. It is extinguished by this thing. I have shown it the way in. It is waiting for my final moment. The device must be destroyed. I must destroy myself before it takes my last sight and uses it to find you. The discovery of the journal immediately triggered an aggressive, swift response from the Directorate, who seized the manuscript, categorized it as Class Omega threat, and attempted to erase all records of its existence. However, a junior research analyst, terrified by the journal's contents, managed to photocopy the most disturbing pages, anonymously mailing them to a small, skeptical newspaper editor who dismissed the tale as the ravings of a madman, a dismissal that ironically ensured the core, terrifying truth of Finch's work survived the official purge, preserved now as the foundational mystery of the forever light phenomenon, ready to be uncovered tonight. The discovery of Finch's manuscript didn't just reveal a scientific scandal. It unleashed a terrifying psychological truth, the core concept Finch named the ocular effect. According to his frantic, deteriorating notes, the last sight was not merely a passive image. It was an active psychological echo that, once captured by the device, imprinted itself not only on the film but on the observer. Finch noted a disturbing shift in his own perception after recording Davies' final, terrified vision of the dark sphere. He wrote of waking nightmares where the sphere was always present, just on the periphery of his sight, silent, waiting, a perfect embodiment of impossibility. The terror was not seeing the creature, but the realization that the creature was seeing through him, borrowing his eyes to observe the world of the living. This was the true horror of the ocular device. It provided a two-way window at the moment of human fragility, creating a permanent, malignant connection. The entity which Finch hesitantly termed the observer was now aware of Finch's existence, and worse, aware of its own recorded image. The psychological breakdown Finch experienced was a testament to the entity's influence. He began to believe the observer wasn't waiting for him to die, but actively orchestrating his environment, moving shadows, causing objects to shift, slowly driving him toward the moment where he would be forced to turn the device on himself. The final, horrifying speculation detailed in the manuscript was that the captured last sight photograph itself was not just a record. It was a vessel, a physical point of contact in our dimension that stabilized the observer's presence. Finch desperately documented his attempts to destroy the image, burning, tearing, drowning it, but the negatives always reappeared, slightly shifted, subtly different, as if mocking his efforts from within the locked safe. The ocular effect, therefore, became the silent punishment for having peered behind the final curtain, eternal paranoia that the entity you captured is now observing you through the very fabric of your reality. The true legacy of this effect, however, only became apparent decades later when the directorate, the agency that recovered the journal, unknowingly archived the original last sight photograph in their secured facility, unknowingly trapping an aggressive psychological echo within their own walls, ready to observe the very people tasked with covering up the truth. The narrative shifts from the madness of one man to the cold, calculating infection of an entire government system, all thanks to a single, impossible geometric sphere that consumed all light and sanity. The Directorate, the secretive governmental body responsible for fringe science containment, became the unwitting heir to Dr. Finch's terror, tasked with suppressing Class Omega threats, phenomena deemed too existentially destabilizing for public knowledge. They seized the journal, the device components, and most importantly, the singular, surviving photograph of the observer. Their initial approach was clinical, categorized the ocular effect as a psychological contagion, citing Finch's documented paranoia. They failed to understand that the threat was not merely psychological. It was metaphysical. The Directorate set up a secured archival unit, Unit 9, deep beneath a decommissioned facility in Nevada to store the evidence. According to several highly redacted internal memos that later leaked, the staff assigned to Unit 9 quickly began to suffer the very paranoia described in Finch's journal. Technicians reported feeling constant cold air on the back of their necks despite stable temperature controls, and security personnel filed incident reports claiming their camera feeds flickered with unaccountable dark interference whenever they passed the storage locker containing the ocular photograph. The atmosphere became heavy with a profound, unspoken fear, the silent consensus being that the unit was not storing a threat but containing an entity that was actively watching them. The cover-up deepened as the Directorate began to censor and systematically destroy all files related to Dr. Finch's life, erasing his name from university records, medical registries, and public documentation. The goal was not just to suppress the technology, but to annihilate the entire chain of events that led to the observer's arrival. They learned, however, that erasing a historical event is impossible when the event itself is still actively observing its attempted erasure. Leaked reports mention an internal investigation into the possibility of data corruption via environmental influence. Following an incident where the archived journal pages spontaneously rearranged themselves overnight, forming complex geometric equations identical to those Finch had frantically scrawled years earlier, the institution had become the keeper of the gate, and the gate was beginning to influence the keepers themselves. The true, dark irony is that the Directorate, through their stringent security and absolute secrecy, provided the observer with the perfect, isolated environment to observe without interruption, turning the containment unit into the creature's own private viewing theater, setting the stage for the terrifying events surrounding the accidental survival of the most crucial witness to Finch's work. Amidst the systemic cover-up by the Directorate, one human element remained unsuppressed: Nurse Evelyn Thorne. Evelyn worked at St. Judas Infirmary in the late 1950s and was the last living person known to have regularly interacted with Dr. Finch before his disappearance. She was never officially interviewed, as the Directorate assumed her fragmented memories of the Mad Doctor were irrelevant. They were fatally wrong. Evelyn, now an elderly woman living in self-imposed isolation, spent decades wrestling with a specific recurring memory: the silence. She often spoke to her few remaining family members about the profound, unnatural silence that descended upon the basement every time Finch activated the ocular device. A silence so complete it felt like a physical pressure absorbing all other sound. Evelyn did not remember the details of the device or the horrifying images, but she remembered Thomas Davies' final stare. She testified in a private interview with an independent investigator, a meeting conducted years before the discovery of the journal, that, In his final moment, Thomas Davies looked past Finch, past her, and directly at the corner of the ceiling, and in that corner, she claimed, the light was wrong. It wasn't dark. It was an absence of light, a place where photons simply ceased to exist, forming a perfect minute circular void. This memory, a direct human account of the observer's initial appearance, was the key piece of evidence the directorate missed. Evelyn's testimony confirmed Finch's later journal entries about the spherical shape and the deliberate, calculated nature of the observer's arrival. She also recalled an unusual detail that nobody else knew. Finch had a habit of keeping a small handheld tape recorder running on a shelf during his procedures, hidden beneath a stack of rags. This detail, buried under decades of official erasure, pointed to the existence of a highly personal, possibly uncensored record of the final experiment, a record that could contain the raw audio of Thomas Davies' last terrifying words and potentially the ambient sound of the observer's first true manifestation. Evelyn's willingness to finally speak out, driven by the need to rid herself of that heavy, unnatural silence, became the fragile thread leading the investigator back toward the now demolished St. Jude's site, hunting for a piece of magnetic tape that could confirm every terrifying claim made by the mad scientist and expose the true, horrifying process by which the observer claims its final sight. The pursuit of Evelyn Thorney's memory led the independent investigator back to the grounds of the former St. Jude's infirmary. The location was now a barren, overgrown field, but the investigator, armed with Evelyn's precise memory of Finch's hiding spots, focused on the former location of the boiler room. After painstaking excavation, they uncovered what Finch had truly hidden. Not just the journal, but a lead-lined cassette box containing a single, aged magnetic tape, the missing, uncensored audio recording of the Thomas Davies experiment. The tape was corrupted, but the investigator managed to salvage the final 3 minutes. The audio did not contain scientific data. It contained terror. It started with the hum of the ocular device, followed by the muffled cries of Thomas Davies' sounds of Finch's calm, detached instructions, and then the crucial 20 seconds where Davies' cries ceased, replaced by a profound, agonizing silence, the same unnatural silence Evelyn Thorne remembered. In the final 5 seconds, however, before the tape abruptly cuts out, 2 distinct auditory phenomena are recorded: a high-frequency metallic scraping and Thomas Davies' final, choked whisper, precisely mirroring the quote from Finch's manuscript, "It knows I saw it." But the audio revealed a new, more petrifying detail. Directly after Davies' whisper, a low-frequency pulse, too deep to be heard by the human ear, but clearly registered on the magnetic tape, a sound Finch's notes describe as the observer's arrival signature. This audio evidence provided an undeniable, objective layer to Finch's claims. Furthermore, the cassette box contained one final, chilling relic: a small, discarded photographic negative that Finch had failed to destroy, a highly damaged but visually discernible image. Through digital enhancement, the investigator was able to glimpse the observer's true form as it appeared to Davies, not just a geometric sphere, but a sphere composed of swirling, chaotic human shadows, a perfect condensed void framed by the captured final energy of every soul it had claimed. This image, the raw, unedited, true last sight, confirmed Finch's deepest fear. The entity was not abstract. It was a collector, a sentient, infinitely hungry mechanism that devoured the moment the light went out, ensuring the darkness was not empty, but eternally occupied by it. The modern chapter of the Forever Light mystery began not with the independent investigator, but with the very organization that sought to suppress it, the Directorate. Decades after incinerating Finch's original lab, the Directorate, desperate to understand the power they contained, began attempts to reverse engineer the Ocular device. They sought to create a replicant device, a purified, streamlined version of Finch's monstrosity, hoping to harness the observer's arrival signature as a tool for interrogation, a weapon that could extract the truth by threatening the very nature of the subject's final consciousness. This renewed effort, documented in heavily encrypted files leaked years later, was a catastrophic failure disguised as a success. The Directorate succeeded in building a device capable of intercepting the final visual input of a dying mind, but they failed to replicate Finch's psychological resilience. The first test of the replicant device was conducted on a terminal volunteer within a secure subterranean laboratory. The moment the device was activated, the laboratory's deep-spectrum recording equipment registered the arrival signature pulse with terrifying clarity. But the test subject's last sight was not a unique image. It was a perfect, crystalline replica of the observer's sphere, the same image captured from Thomas Davies decades prior. This was the terrifying proof that the observer was not a single entity, but a collective consciousness capable of instantly projecting itself into any activated ocular window. The psychological impact on the lead technicians was immediate. They suffered simultaneous severe psychological trauma, describing the observer's projected image as an answer to every question they had ever asked, but an answer that rendered their entire existence meaningless. The replicant device had successfully summoned the observer, but the observer had instantly co-opted the device's purpose, using it as a direct transmission conduit to infect the minds of the living. The ensuing chaos led to a Level 5 quarantine, and the lab was sealed with immediate effect, turning the secure facility into a monument of institutional failure. The directorate realized, too late, that Finch was not a mad scientist. He was a desperate messenger. His device wasn't a discovery. It was an invitation, and now the invitation had been reissued by their own hands, and the observer, now fully aware of the 21st century world, was listening for the next time the lights went out. The full truth of the forever light phenomenon, extrapolated from Finch's journals and the leaked directorate data, reveals a cosmic horror that transcends simple fear of death. The observer, the perfectly dark sphere composed of human shadows, is not an executioner or a god. It is a mechanism of exit. Finch theorized that when human consciousness separates from the physical form, the soul emits a final, potent burst of energy, the forever light. The observer exists to harvest this light. It is an infinitely ancient, sentient cosmic collector that waits at the threshold, drawing the final conscious perception into itself, and adding it to its collective composition, turning the moment of death into a moment of pure, terrifying consumption. The true horror is the realization that the lights go out forever, not because the brain dies, but because the observer extinguishes the light, ensuring that the final vibrant moment of human existence is perpetually trapped within its dark structure. This completely recontextualizes death. There is no peaceful fading, only a final, horrifying encounter with the entity that steals the last piece of human identity. Furthermore, Finch's final, desperate entries hint at the observer's ultimate design. It is building something. By collecting these final sights, these pure bursts of consciousness, the observer is slowly compiling a complete map of reality, compiled from the perspective of millions of human departures. The entity does not hate. It simply processes. And the terrifying implication is that once its map is complete, once it has consumed enough final consciousness to understand the full spectrum of our reality, it will be able to fully cross the threshold, stabilizing its presence in the world of the living, not through magic but through perfect collected synthesized knowledge. The fear of being watched, documented in Finch's paranoia, was not a delusion. It was an early warning signal. Every ocular device test was not a step towards understanding life, but a step towards validating the observer's cosmic collection, providing the entity with crucial data points for its inevitable and terrifying final entrance into our world, an entrance designed and facilitated by the very men and women who sought to understand the great unknown. And so we arrive at the cold, dark conclusion of the forever light mystery. Dr. Alistair Finch's terrifying legacy is not the ocular device, but the terrifying confirmation that the universe does not provide the peace we crave at the end. It provides a final observer. The directorate failed to erase Finch, failed to destroy the observer, and instead confirmed the worst fears. The entity is sentient, and it is here. The replicant device, now sealed in concrete miles beneath the Nevada desert, remains a ticking clock. A deactivated summoning beacon waiting for the inevitable day when desperation or accidental scientific curiosity reactivates the signal, inviting the collector to finish its map. You, the listener, now possess the horrifying knowledge that the absolute darkness is not empty space. It is a final, geometric structure composed of silent, screaming shadows waiting for your turn. The true final image is not your loved ones or your deepest regret. It is the face of the observer, consuming the final burst of your life force. Every time you turn off the lights, every time the room plunges into shadow, remember the last sight of Thomas Davies, remember the frantic scrawls in Finch's journal, and remember the cold, unwavering logic of the dark sphere. For the light does not simply fade. It is claimed, and its claim is absolute. What Finch saw, what Davies felt, and what the directorate failed to contain is now a part of history, a dark, suppressed history that waits for the light of your attention to shine upon it. But be warned. Knowledge has a cost, and that cost is often paranoia. As you go about your life, you carry the knowledge of the observer, and somewhere, deep in the absolute silence, the observer now carries the knowledge of you, because you chose to watch, you chose to know. And the final question is, when the light finally goes out, and the observer arrives to claim its due, what will the very last thing you see be.